Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today we're going to continue jumping into some older Warhammer fantasy lore. And what better yet than rediscovering the Skaven a little bit more. You see, when you think of the Skaven, you think of clan rats, you think of hellpit abominations, doom wheels, and, of course, you think of the Great Horned Rat. This is the patron deity of the Ratmen who inspires them to be as nefarious as they are. But what if I told you that a long time ago there was another deity, a second god of the Skaven? This is Queefil Gristlegut, a rather interesting minor chaos deity that was introduced way back then in the Realms of Chaos books. So yeah, he's very much not canon anymore, but he does get some fairly recent mentions. However, there is quite a lot to discuss about him, so I want to dedicate this video to him, because as you can see, this is a gigantic Skaven. He is much larger than even the marauders around him. This is obviously in the artwork. He's also got the ability to fly, and like many of us know, if Skaven had the ability to fly, they would be absolutely terrifying. But this basically introduced another minor chaos god. This book itself allowed you to create your own demonic pantheons, not only just a god, but demons, boons, and so on. And while he's long since been removed from the canon, obviously due to the end times, there have been fairly recent mentions. We'll get to them a little bit later. For now, let's go over everything in the Chaos book. So early on, as most of Warhammer Fantasy, there was not a lot of fleshing out, yet we still do get a little bit of context regarding Queefil. As we can see here, he began as a randomly generated Skaven hero, so this is very likely that he was elevated to a demonic position, you know, that of a vermin lord, and then decided to go renegade, because, well, you know, that's very Skaven-y, and it's not completely out of the question considering that we've seen other demons do this. For example, Skarbrand turning against Khorne. If Skarbrand would have killed Khorne, or if Khorne was a bit more vengeful, he could have cast him out and made him true renegade. And we do get a full description on how the body looks, which is as follows. Queefil gets his wings. As a Skaven, he has a tail, and he also has horns already thanks to his bestial face attribute, and grows to an impressive 10 or 12 feet high. He's already taller than a normal Skaven because of his overgrown legs. So his final appearance is that of a gigantic humanoid rat with long legs, wings, a tail, and a hunchback. His head is that of a horned goat, already losing the mutation of the rat, maybe because he's becoming a renegade. He wears chaos armor and carries a serrated sword. Queefil is quite imposing. Nobody's going to mistake him for anything other than the mighty demon he is. He has a gore attack from his horns and another poisonous bite attack. Queefil can also levitate, and as a demonic creature, it seems appropriate to have him levitate at will without the need to use levitation points. Already we're getting quite a cool little idea here, and we already have a note from the writers, because early on with these types of books, you'd get a lot of writers' notes in there, which goes as how he acts as a patron, right? The quote goes as follows: "This is where I can really let my imagination take over. Gristlegut is based on a Skaven, so his personality is going to reflect that. Perhaps he screams and screeches like a rat, repeating the same words several times over as Skaven often do." This is actually quite good because you can see how far back Skaven were actually defined as a character, well, race. But let's continue. Like all Skaven, I surmise that he favors tunnels and dark places. He probably likes plotting and planning too, because Skaven are always scheming to undermine human civilization. In fact, Queefil doesn't like humans much, except when he can twist them to his will, and he takes pleasure in the destruction of towns and cities of all kinds. So Queefil is a devious and subtly manipulative patron. He doesn't care much for humans or their cities, but he favors underground places and darkness. When it comes to designing a rewards of Queefil table, I have to bear all this in mind. We'll go into that in just a second, but this is just the main lore that we have of Queefil. At least in this period of time. It wasn't then until the 2000s until we started getting some more lore, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, this is the aforementioned rewards table, which was a system for these types of books back then where you'd be able to get boons, get some bonuses. Keep in mind that back in the day, this was all very roleplay centric because that was what Warhammer was originally, and then slowly started turning into the full war scale type of game that we already know of. But yeah, this is actually quite interesting as, yeah, this kind of solidifies him more as a minor chaos god, right? Well, there's a little bit more here. At this point in time, Queefil actually had some demons. Yep, his own pantheon of greater and even lesser demons that he had under his command. The first one being a greater demon known as the Six-Eyed Slayer, which from the little artwork that we do have, you can see that the creature is kinda inspired by Queefil himself. And it's also not very Skaven-y, which is actually really curious, and the little lore that we do have about this creature is as follows. So the demon is about 10 feet tall, with a very stocky and rounded body. It has 2 goat's heads, and each bears 3 eyes and is pointed. Perhaps the points end in horns. This would be very spectacular. It has wings and a tail, which I imagine to be that like a goat in keeping with other features. One leg is that of a goat, and is cloven, and both it and the demon's normal foot are 3 times normal size. The creature carries a mutating chaos weapon, the warp attack causing its victims to change and mutate. Already kind of interesting, and we already know that, that's the basis of what happened with Warpstone and so on, but already very curious. The next is a lesser demon known as the Floating Horror, a pretty interesting sight, very much like a harpy, but a little bit different, so let's discuss the lore there first, right? So, the demon has a female human body, but the legs and the wings of a bird, and the clawed feet of a bear. Its head is also female in keeping with the harpy theme. Its arms are reptilian and clawed, and they change color like a chameleon. The creature can levitate, and I interpret this so that the demon appears to float several feet above the ground, hence its name, the Floating Horror. Yeah, it looks like a bit of a horror, and it is a mutation of various degrees. But then again, this is where the Chaos Gods were being really fleshed out. This is where we even had some look at Malal's demons too, so you can see where everything is just like shaping up to the start of what we know as Warhammer itself. The last 2 creatures we'll talk about together, as there's no real lore to them, but we've got the Steed of Queefil, so this is a mount option, which is kind of interesting, known as the Fire Runner, which is apparently able to shoot fire from its arms and so on, which is kind of curious, because obviously that ended up going to Tzeentch, but yeah, this is essentially a proto-Tzeentchian demon, I guess. And the last one is the Beast of Queefil, which is the Thing. A bit of a flea thing, something that we've kind of already seen. We saw loads of bugs with Malal early on, so it's kind of curious to see this here too, honestly. Still, pretty grim, and not gonna lie, I would have liked the Thing as an actual monster that we could be able to use on the tabletop. But that already served as a decent introduction to Queefil, a rather curious god, which, yeah, even I'm pretty much confused. It would be nice if in the future we did get some mentions, but I imagine that he's been retconned out of the lore for quite some time now, or he still exists as a minor chaos deity, but that's the thing. As a minor god, you can easily be forgotten about. In Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition, we did get a little bit of a hint again towards Queefil. You see there's a table of the Chaos Gods, and Queefil is there, mentioned as a Chaos God of Destruction, and some people think that he might be another name for the Horned Rat. Which, yes, a lot of people would be thinking that, depending on the circumstances and obviously who's interpreting the lore. What is very interesting to point out here is that the Horned Rat isn't here. He's not counted as a Chaos God during this time, where others are, for example, Zuvasin, Koho. These are the gods that originally replaced Malal in canon, yet Queefil remains. He's considered to be a Skaven, but not so much a Skaven god, rather a Chaos God. And again, just as quickly as Queefil was reintroduced into the lore, he disappeared. Yeah, it's very curious. Possibly Games Workshop not really knowing what to do with Queefil, maybe he fails somewhere else, but then a very famous Skaven character came into the equation. This is Gracia Thanquol, who, well, you all know Gracia Thanquol. We're still waiting for him in Total War Warhammer 3, but you know him from the Gotrek and Felix series, and then obviously his own standalone books in the early 2000s, and, well, late 2000s at the very beginning, essentially. But yeah, there are a few mentions to Queefil. The first mention is in Thanquol's very own Gracia novel. This is one of 3 which kind of focused around on him, and this one was in 2009, I believe. So, let's set the scene here, right? he's right now getting very powered up, right? He's experiencing quite a lot. Let's read the 3 paragraphs here just to kind of set the scene. In the flickering dark of the burning city, with the night pierced by the screams of dying men and the air stagnant with the stench of scorched flesh, he could feel power surge through his body, raw and primal and awesome in its terrible magnificence. It roared through his veins like a living thing, firing every nerve and synapse, awakening them to the eldritch power that soaked in his flesh. Power. The power to rip apart mountains, power to smash the puny warrens of his enemies and entomb them forever with their treachery, power to obliterate the stinking hovels of the humans and grind that pathetic preening breed beneath the clawed feet of the Skaven. Power second only to that of the horned rat himself, mightiest of gods. No, he corrected himself. With such power, he was no longer a simple thing of flesh and spirit. He was a god himself, ascended like the infamous blasphemer Queefil the Vile. His was the power to rend and slay and rip and tear. His was the power to rule, to hold the entire Under-Empire and the broken rubble of the miserable human surface realm in a claw of iron. He would squeeze that claw until the world screamed and everything knew that it lived only because he allowed it. So this is a really interesting thing here, because it mentions Queefil as a secondary Skaven god, a former Skaven that became renegade and ascended, right? And this is really curious, because we do hear of stuff like this. We do hear of mortals ascending to godhood, with Sigmar Heldenhammer being the best example of this, but not so much with the Skaven. I wonder how the Horned Rat feels about this, right? Clearly, he would have Vermin Lords hunt him down, right, and destroy him, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. The second mention is in the Temple of the Serpent book. This was released in 2010, and what's happening here is Thanquol is basically the target of Clan Eshin, and I want to read a few paragraphs here too, mostly because it actually shows how powerful Thanquol actually is, which a lot of people see him as a Scooby-Doo villain, which, yeah, he is. He really is. But he's a powerful Scooby-Doo villain. So, let's read the paragraphs. It took Thanquol a heartbeat to realize what had happened. The dart had missed him, glancing off his horn. Fear and rage warred for mastery of him when he realized how close he had come to dying. Fear put up a good fight, but in the end it was rage that won out. Thanquol lifted himself from the ground, his eyes focused on the assassin clinging to the wall above him. The Gracier's hand closed about the chunk of warpstone in his pocket, breaking off a tiny fragment and popping it into his mouth. The assassin seemed paralyzed with horror, as unable to move as the decoy had been when faced by Bone Ripper's unstoppable charge. A sickly green light cracked within the depths of Thanquol's eyes, as the magical energies of the warpstone flowed through his mind and seeped into his soul. He could only feel the awesome power of the Horned Rat ripping through him, the magical winds seeping into his body. He ground his fangs together, his brain flooded with images of destruction. He would incinerate this entire street and everything in it, leave the buildings nothing but heaps of slag. He would burn the assassin's shadow into the very stone with the fury of his magic and send his soul shrieking into Queefil's sunken hell. Then he would cast down the shattered tower and drag Sneak's shattered corpse from the rubble. So, one thing here which is kind of related to the tabletop, so you would have a piece of warpstone which could either damage you if you had it, or you could give you an extra wind of magic, so it was good for casting spells, and especially if you wanted to cast off the dreaded 13th, but yeah, it's nice to see that represented here. Obviously it's very volatile. Just because Thanquol had it and nothing happened doesn't mean that he couldn't have it and just explode, essentially. Second thing is, we have a sunken hell now. This is Queefil's realm. Again, no context whatsoever, but it's nice to see him getting mentions, especially in 2010, right? And the last time we hear of Queefil is in Thanquol's Doom, which is in 2011. He's actually mentioned twice. So this first paragraph is as follows. Thanquol tugged nervously at his whiskers, remembering his horrifying encounter with the bloated toad priest of the lizard men. He had once stood over the Black Ark, the most sacred of Skaven artifacts, and he could safely say that the magical energies he had sensed emanating from the Slann had been greater. For a sorcerer, it was a chilling prospect to consider that such power could exist within a living being. His glands clenched at the mere idea of facing a creature like that again. It would be a cold day in Queefil's larder before Thankful set a paw in Lustria again. So, again, yeah, just another reference to him, but still, it's very important that he's still getting references. And the last time that we hear of Queefil, at least to my knowledge, is in that very same book. Thankful had been screwed over by some other Skaven, yeah, surprise surprise, and the paragraph goes as follows. It was tempting to order Bone Ripper to start tearing apart Casket's minions. The Rat Ogre would wreak havoc upon the closely packed vermin, leaving Thankful free to unleash his mighty sorcery against Kweethul and Casket. He would turn the two maggots into burn marks on the wall of the tunnel. He would send their souls shrieking into the black abyss of Queefil the Abominable. He would visit upon them the wrath of the Horned Rat and rip their innards with his own claws. Yeah, charming. Very, very charming. But again, this is the last mention, and it's rather curious again because we still didn't really get too much information. I have a theory, which is kind of common with Games Workshop, that maybe there were more plans for Queefil and they just got scrapped, as we've actually had novels coming out for Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer 40k, and possibly Age of Sigmar too. I know the 40k one and the Fantasy one is certain, that references other novels that just really never happened. Yeah, events from other novels that we just never got to read. It was a very common thing, obviously, in the end times too. But yeah, it could be. It could very much be. So now that we've gone over all the lore that exists of this minor deity, what do I think? And honestly, I think that this is still a possibility that this character could exist. It could just end up being nods to long-forgotten Chaos God. But yeah, it's not out of the question to see a minor Chaos God appear. In fact, you know, the lore always pushes the fact that there's loads and loads of Chaos Gods. It's just we normally speak about the big four, and obviously Hashut, because he counts as like a fifth. It could be very possible that he was a Skaven that found some other power and absorbed it, rather than being a Skaven that got turned into a Vermin Lord and going renegade. But it's still really, really, really curious, as, yeah, it's a deity that is technically a Skaven. It is technically, you know, despite the fact that it's a deity now, really weird that the Horned Rat doesn't make it vilified. Obviously, someone like Thankful would still worship him or call upon him anyway, and other Skaven would anyway, because, you know, Skaven don't really follow the rules, even if it is a sacred thing. But I don't know, I just really love the idea of another god, a potential Skaven pantheon, as, yeah, we've got loads of pantheons all over the place. The fact that he's mentioned as a Chaos God and the Horned Rat wasn't, leads me to believe that he did absorb some other sort of power, maybe from another minor god, and just went from there. But I love the idea. I honestly love the idea. I really hope we see some more nods given to this god in the future, possibly through Warhammer the Old World, as there'll be reason to write about these types of things again. You never know. You never know. What do you guys think about this character? Well, God. It's really weird to say God when it's a second Skaven, you know? But yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion. I'm actually kind of surprised that I haven't really covered this God before. So yeah, this is going to be kind of cool. I hope you guys like these types of videos, because I'm enjoying going into the older, deeper lore. But with all that being said, have a nice day, and I'll see you all again very, very soon.